Good evening and welcome to the Wide Angle. I'm Brendon Fallon. The final withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan came 1 minute before the August 31st deadline. The following day, the White House National Security Advisor was asked,
what is the Taliban? Are they now our frenemy? Are they our adversary? Are they our enemy? What are they?
Well, it's hard to put a label on it, in part because we have yet to see what they are going to be now that they are in control, physical control of Afghanistan.
Sullivan did, however, point out that the Taliban are not nice guys. At the same time, he expressed hopes, maybe slightly ungrounded hopes, that the US can work with the Taliban to see remaining evacuations of US citizens and allies run smoothly. Meanwhile, there's signs that the Taliban has other plans for US allies in Afghanistan. Recently, a report was leaked from the non-profit Norwegian Center for Global Analyses, which provides intelligence to the UN. It supports numerous claims that the Taliban have been violently enacting retaliation against those they see as opponents. The report says the Taliban have been going door to door hunting down those on its blacklist. It adds that they threaten to kill or harm their targets' relatives if they don't surrender. At the same time, just over the border, the Chinese Communist Party has its own unique take on the rise of the Taliban. China's foreign minister is claiming the US withdrawal as the dawn of a kind of golden age for Afghanistan.
阿富汗得以摆脱外国的军事占领，阿富汗人民迎来国家和平与重建的新起点。阿富汗的历史翻开了新的一页。
The CCP has made no secret of its friendly intentions towards the Taliban. As the Taliban proceeded with its occupation of Afghanistan, the CCP said it's, quote, willing to develop friendly and cooperative relations with Afghanistan, end quote. While other countries have closed shop, the CCP has kept China's embassy running in Kabul. China's foreign minister even hosted a delegation of 9 Taliban representatives in July. Please like the video and check your subscription to The Wide Angle. We've found some viewers have been suspiciously unsubscribed. Tonight we'll interrogate what's driving this with the insights of Middle East and South and East Asian experts James Dorsey and Dr. Antonio Graceffo. We're also going to look at how such a friendship is likely to impact the US and the world more broadly. Given the CCP's signaled willingness to recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government of Afghanistan, where do you see this action fitting into the theme of your book of China's push into the Middle East?
The fact that which makes it more sensitive for the Chinese is the presence of militants on Afghan territory on China's border. Don't forget that if you go back several years, both Al-Qaeda and Islamic State operating from Syria or in videos released from Syria threatened the Chinese because of the Uyghur issue.
The Belt and Road Initiative is really the jewel of Xi Jinping's policies. And the Afghanistan, Central Asia, Southeast Asia are all very important to the Belt and Road. So basically, China's policy has always been to maintain stability, but to maintain stability in areas where they have investment.
Could the CCP's support of the Taliban, as Dr. Graceffo suggests, simply come down to it protecting its bottom line, protecting its investments? It's certainly one possibility. Undoubtedly, the CCP's most ambitious investment project is its multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. And when we look at how this so-called infrastructure development project is playing out, it's easy to see how good relations with the Taliban might factor in. The BRI draws its name from the historic Silk Road, which dates back millennia and linked the East and West via trade. On paper, the CCP's Silk Road reboot is about building global trade and infrastructure development along 2 corridors, the Belt Corridor on land and the Road Corridor, though obviously not a road, connecting countries via ocean routes. The Belt starts in mainland China and follows along the Silk Road via Central Asia to Russia and Europe. So it all sounds well-intentioned enough. What reason could we possibly have to question the underlying purposes of China's Belt and Road Initiative? Well, Dr. Frank Tian-Hsieh has a few reasons to offer. A professor of marketing at USC Aiken, Dr. Hsieh says there's veiled geopolitical and security motives behind the Belt and Road, like the desire to occupy locations of military strategic importance. And there are a few more compelling examples of this than what's happened to Sri Lanka. As a side effect of participating in the BRI, Sri Lanka's Hambantota port is now in the official custody of Beijing on a 99-year lease. Sri Lanka naively partnered with the CCP to build the port. It entered into a 99-year agreement whereby the CCP covered 85% of the cost. But the offer that was too good to be true proved to be just that. When Sri Lanka defaulted on its payments, the CCP promptly relieved Sri Lanka of its new port, which just happens to be located in a position of strategic importance. A 2018 study found that 23 of the 68 countries that are hosting BRI-funded projects were at risk of debt distress. It found a number of these countries, including Pakistan and Tajikistan, neighbors of Afghanistan, to be at particularly high risk of debt distress with future BRI financing. Under the BRI, the CCP has signed contracts with 46 countries in Africa, involved 38 countries in Asia, 27 countries in Europe, 12 countries in Oceania, and 19 countries in Central and South America. So this is where Afghanistan and the Taliban come in. It goes without saying that the BRI is an investment of unprecedented scope for the CCP. And like any shrewd business operator, the CCP is not going to shy away from protecting its investment.
Many Westerners who are critics of China believe that China will just trade with anybody or they'll just invest anywhere and they don't care about the local situation at all. And it's actually not true. They care about stability. They don't care about human rights in the way that Western powers do, for example. I don't think that they would hesitate to move forward on investments in a country that has major human rights abuses or has a strongman or totalitarian government. In fact, they tend to prefer a strongman or totalitarian government because it ensures stability. And if there's stability, then of course their investments will be safe. So I think that what we're going to see is China wants the Taliban to stabilize.
To the CCP, Taliban occupation represents potential stability for Afghanistan. More specifically, Taliban rule represents the potential curbing of what might be called terrorist activity by militants. Dampening this kind of activity on the Afghan border with Pakistan is of particular importance to the CCP.
The issue with the security for China, I think, is not so much about protecting their Afghanistan investments, but rather protecting the Pakistan investments, because Pakistan is much more important for the Belt and Road.
Infrastructure projects that the CCP has undertaken with Pakistan are among the most ambitious of the Belt and Road portfolio. These come under the banner of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. The CPEC is 1,850 miles long. Its collective projects are valued at $70 billion. Alongside building the corridor, the CCP has invested $50 billion to build 5 reservoirs and hydropower stations in Pakistan's Indus River Basin. Needless to say, the CCP has a lot riding on its Pakistan investment. The problem for the CCP is the presence of other militant stakeholders, like the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or the Turkestan Islamic Party. Needless to say, these players aren't as enthusiastic about the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor as the CCP or the Pakistani government is.
There is the Pakistan Taliban that has committed terrorist attacks on Chinese targets in Pakistan. Also, the Taliban from Afghanistan have, as far as we know, gone over the border either into Pakistan or into Xinjiang, or at least that's what the Chinese government claims.
In Pakistan in July, the Taliban there killed several Chinese engineers in a bombing attack. In April, they made an apparent assassination attempt on the Chinese ambassador. What do you think is motivating these attacks on Chinese targets by the Taliban in Pakistan, I think you said?
The interesting thing about CPEC, so CPEC is the part of the Belt and Road that runs through Pakistan. The interesting thing about that is that I've been in contact with groups of intellectuals in Pakistan that completely oppose CPEC. And if you watch the Twitter sphere and the social media, it seems that the average man on the street is very much against CPEC. And they would like to see this ending. They feel like that China is infringing on their sovereignty. Their nation is signing debt agreements without the permission or the consensus of the people. The people, of course, will have to repay these loans. I believe I saw yesterday that the loans are at an average of 5.7%. So I think that there is a very large pushback against CPEC among the entire population of Pakistan. Then you have terrorists, Taliban terrorists. You have the Pakistan Taliban, and they're attacking these Chinese targets.
Naturally, this is a major spanner in the works for the Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road agenda. It might see cozying up to the Taliban in Afghanistan as part of the solution to this problem. If the Afghanistan Taliban are on side, they may just stop militants from crossing into Pakistan and adding to the CCP's economic corridor with Pakistan woes. With that said, it's not only the CCP that has hopes of the Taliban keeping militants in Afghanistan in check. Central Asian foreign correspondent James Dorsey gave his insights on this.
But if you look at very carefully what has been said by the Russians, by the Chinese, and by the Americans throughout the negotiations in Doha with the Taliban, there never was a demand for expulsion of the militants. The demand was control and make sure that they are held in check. I think the reason for that is the fear or the realization that if the Taliban were to remove these people from their territory, it would not be an extradition. It would be quietly letting them slip out of the country. And then you would have a situation where you have no control. You have no idea where these guys went. Your surveillance is gone. And so therefore, even if it looks a little bit like the fox guarding the chicken coop, fact of the matter is that is a better situation than them running around freely.
We've just looked at how the China-Pakistan economic corridor could be a key motive behind attacks on Chinese targets within Pakistan. However, there is another equally, if not more compelling, potential motive.
So it may be that they just have the same feelings, the same anger that the local people have. That might be part of it. It might be because of China's human rights abuses against the Uyghur in Xinjiang. It may be in order to support them.
Earlier this year, the BBC reported on how the Chinese Communist Party is extending its crackdown on Uyghurs beyond China's borders. It told the story of Kalbina Sadiq, a Uyghur woman who had worked in one of the CCP's secret detention centers in Xinjiang. Sadiq and 3 other women had spoken to the BBC about the rape and torture taking place there. 2 weeks later, she received a video call from her sister's phone from Xinjiang. However, when she answered, it wasn't her sister, but a Xinjiang policeman. "What are you up to, Kalbina?" he said, smiling. "Who are you with?" Sadiq took a screenshot. When the police officer heard the sound it made, he removed his numbered police jacket. Sadiq took another screenshot. Based on United Nations reports, there are over 1 million Uyghur and other Muslims in so-called re-education camps in Xinjiang. Since 2017, these people have been subject to mass detention, surveillance, and forced labor by the CCP. According to many accounts, the abuse has extended to sterilization, torture, and rape. Naturally, the CCP denies all this. It says its camps are vocational centers aimed at combating terrorism. Sadiq recounted the words of the policeman to the BBC. He said, "You must bear in mind that all your family and relatives are with us. You must very carefully think about that fact." Ironically, if there's any question that the Uyghur in Xinjiang are being brutally repressed, it's the CCP's off-target propaganda that seems the most effective at dispelling any doubts. For example, Associated Press reported a significant and alarming drop in Uyghur birth rate between 2015 and 2018. There are wide concerns that this is due in part to the alleged forced sterilization of Uyghur women. The CCP, of course, has come out to counter this. It said the reduced births are due to the family planning policy that it's implemented among the Uyghur. And if this wasn't spurious enough, a tweet by the Chinese embassy in the US did even more to raise suspicions. It said that Uyghur women are emancipated and no longer baby-making machines due to the regime's reproductive health promotion. Now, getting back to the China-Pakistan economic corridor, we can assume that there's a fair share of militants in Pakistan sympathetic to the plight of fellow Muslims in Xinjiang. In turn, this could be a driver for attacks against CCP targets in the region. This prompts another question. How about the Taliban that now occupy Afghanistan? Where do their loyalties lie when it comes to choosing between the profitable relations with the CCP and standing in solidarity with the CCP's Muslim victims in Xinjiang? In July, the Taliban said that they would, quote, not allow anyone to use Afghan soil against China. The CCP has already lent significant legitimacy to the Taliban as rulers of Afghanistan. This, along with its ability to offer technology and infrastructure, could trump any sentimentality the Taliban has toward the Uyghur.
Now, the real big question here is, and that's going to be the litmus test I think, even though nobody's pointed to it yet, the Chinese have, across the globe, demanded extradition and expulsion of Uyghurs. Many of them not having anything to do, as far as we know, with militancy, political violence, Uyghur nationalism. So why would they want these guys, even if they're controlled, walking around freely in a country on their border? So my guess is that the Chinese at some point are going to demand extradition. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Taliban handle that.
On August 28th, journalist and Kabul University lecturer Sami Mahdi tweeted this video of a local artist who was killed the day before by Taliban in Andarab. Mahdi tweets that he was a famous folk singer in the valley and that his murder was confirmed by his son. Allegedly, the singer was being punished for breaking the Taliban prohibition on public performance. Then there was this video, which was tweeted by the Economic Times, showing the treatment of a comic who was allegedly later killed by his Taliban abductors. The video's captioning says the comic was allegedly a member of the Afghan National Police. If so, his alleged murder can be considered another act of Taliban retaliation against Afghan government workers. At the same time, the captions say a Taliban spokesman has said that those in the video will be arrested and tried. All in all, we're talking here about two regimes with track records of gross disregard for human rights and dignity, most particularly to the people of the nations they're apparently governing. China commentator and repeat guest on our show, Solomon Yuer, said that you only need to look at how a government treats its people to gauge whether it's trustworthy or not. From that standpoint, how much scope can there really be for bonds of trust and friendship between the CCP and the Taliban? I guess time will tell. So the CCP's support of the Taliban could be driven by wanting stability in the region, which according to its logic could call on the Taliban to keep a handle on militants in Afghanistan and also possibly extraditing Uyghur to Xinjiang. What else could be driving the CCP's pursuit of this relationship? Answering this question involves looking beyond Afghanistan and even the Middle East to consider how China now stands on the world stage.
If we look at China's actual allies, real allies of China, China does not have a lot of allies. They have a lot of countries that owe them money. They have a lot of countries that have to sometimes vote with them in the UN. They don't have real allies, or not a lot, apart from North Korea, maybe Iran, a handful of players. Obviously, the Taliban will then fall into this category of real allies. I would liken Afghanistan to Cambodia in that sense. I think that China will be able to, if China normalizes relations with the Taliban and the Western powers don't, well, then China is going to become the #1 patron of the Taliban. And China's going to ask them not to commit terrorist activity outside of Afghanistan, but beyond that, China's going to be their patron. And there'll be absolutely no chance of the West or the U.S. ever developing any kind of relationship with Afghanistan.
In addition, we can't underestimate the allure of a regime, like many others befriended by the CCP, that can serve as another thorn in the side of the U.S.
Then you had Trump, who significantly sharpened the differences in the gap between Beijing and Washington. You have the Biden administration that doesn't use the same rhetoric, and it's not Trump in his old style, but fundamentally it hasn't really changed Trump's China policy. And so as a result of that, I think the Chinese have become much more assertive than they were. And I think like the Russians, the support for the Maduro regime in Venezuela, some degrees of greater reluctance on North Korea, and so on, that it's all a function of those tensions with the United States. In a sense, you can argue that Maduro, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Khamenei, Ibrahim Raisi in Iran are, from a Chinese perspective, useful irritants. They prick the system. They're not going to really upset the apple cart. Iran maybe a little bit more than others, but but they're useful irritants. Poke fingers out at the United States with.
This leads into our final discussion. Given the dangers posed to it by a potential CCP-Taliban alliance, and also the recent loss of face it suffered in Afghanistan, what's in store for the US now in terms of its international standing?
I mean, I was out for dinner, for lunch today with a senior official of a country that has very close relations with both China and the United States, but is basically viewed as a U.S. ally. And he basically said, look, the Americans were right. They mishandled the way they did it. But no, they haven't lost credibility. Nothing's changed. So what I was saying is, I don't think I think the credibility issue is a superficial one. The United States has seen this before and ultimately survived with its credibility. But there are some countries who also have no options. They'll have close relations with China economically. They may buy weapons from them, but ultimately it's the United States which will be where they look for their guidelines.
I think we really need to engage with Pakistan, increase our friendship with Pakistan. We've always had very good relations with Pakistan. There's been terrorist elements that were hiding out in Pakistan or using Pakistan as a base, and there've been attacks in Pakistan. But Pakistan as a nation, as a people, they generally support America, and they would much rather, if you were to survey 100 people on the street in Pakistan, they would much rather see U.S. engagement rather than Chinese engagement. But if we lose Pakistan, this is just terrible. The port in Pakistan is crucial to China's ability to be able to get oil from the Middle East up to China overland and avoid the U.S. 7th Fleet, avoid the I believe it's the Straits of I don't know if it's the Straits of Malacca, but there's certain sea routes that are very dangerous and they're very long. But the big thing is to avoid a U.S. naval blockade, that we would be able to cut off their oil supply. But now they can go overland through Pakistan. So we need to engage. Increase engagement.
This has been our look at why the Chinese Communist Party is getting friendly with the Taliban and what the impact of such an alliance would be on the US and other Western countries. Please remember to like the video and check your subscription to our channel. Some of our followers have been mysteriously unsubscribed. Thank you for watching and see you next time.